Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Saturday everybody. I hope you're having a restful weekend. It is a Saturday episode, so this will be very foreign policy heavy. And to begin, we start with the tensions between the PRC and the Philippines in the South China Sea around Second Thomas Shoal, an especially dangerous flashpoint, something we've been following very closely for a few months now. To begin, we take note of the salient developments in this space from this week. On Tuesday, the two countries met in Manila for the 9th meeting of the Bilateral Consultation Mechanism, BCM, on the South China Sea. The official statements used friendly language, but details were not discussed, and of course the point of friction still structurally remains. The official PRC version read, for example, quote, "Both sides agreed that maintaining peace and stability in the South China Sea is the interest of China and the Philippines, and also the common goal of countries in the region. Both sides agreed to continue the dialogue and consultation through mechanisms such as the BCM to manage differences." End quote. The Philippine Foreign Ministry said it had, quote, "frank and constructive discussions with China on the South China Sea." End quote. At the meeting, the Philippines and China agreed on the need to restore trust and rebuild confidence to better manage maritime disputes, even as Manila told its neighbour it will be relentless in protecting its interests in the region. The two also discussed the possible resumption of a Duterte-era Joint Coast Guard Committee. The same day, the Vatican's top diplomat in a trip to Manila called on the two parties in the dispute to abide by international law, a subtle reference to the award given to the Philippines and a swipe at China, even as the Vatican tries to balance its own diplomacy with Beijing. On Thursday, Chief of the Philippines Armed Forces, General Romeo Brawner Jr., speaking on the most recent clash around the Second Thomas Shoal, said that Filipino sailors will, quote, "respond appropriately and defend themselves against harassment," end quote, telling reporters, quote, "Under the rules of engagement, a person has a right to defend himself in any manner. So, for instance, should someone attack, what we will do is that we will apply the same level of force that will allow us to defend ourselves," end quote. Brawner added that this proportionality would mean that if Filipino troops were attacked with knives, they will use similar weapons to defend themselves, though they will not resort to excessive force such as gunfire. We remember during the last clash on the 2nd of June, Chinese Coast Guard soldiers were seen wielding knives and other sharp weapons. The same day, Thursday, the Philippines military called for China to return 7 firearms seized by the Chinese Coast Guard during the last flare-up and to pay around $1 million in compensation for damages. Beijing soon after rejected the demand, saying it was the Philippines whose actions had been illegal and provocative. The same day, Thursday, it was reported that the Japanese ambassador to the Philippines stated that Tokyo was, quote, "closely watching the talks between Manila and Beijing," end quote, as the dispute was a, quote, "legitimate concern for Japan and the international community," end quote. There's one more thing to note too. The Philippines Armed Forces chief also told reporters that his government has turned down offers from the United States to assist operations in the South China Sea. Brawner said that the US, a treaty ally, had offered support, but Manila prefers to handle operations on its own. Quote, "Yes, of course, they have been offering help, and they have asked us how they could help us in any way. We try to exhaust all possible options that we have before we ask for help," end quote. Philippine National Security Advisor Eduardo Ano said something similar, telling US media this week, quote, "This is our legitimate national interest, so we don't see any reason for them, the US, to come in. We, the Philippines and China, agreed that there will be some easing tension, but we will assert our rights. We will not compromise our national interest, and we will continue to fight and claim what is ours," end quote. Former Deputy U.S. National Security Advisor Matt Pottinger called for direct U.S. naval support for the resupply missions to the grounded Sierra Madre, but commentators have warned that direct U.S. involvement greatly increases the risk of escalation if an accident occurs. We will continue to watch this space closely as it develops. And speaking of US-China, next up we cover efforts to improve people-to-people exchanges between the two countries, something that Biden and Xi committed to during the November meeting in San Francisco last year. Indeed, the goal was set at seeing 50,000 American students come to China over the next 5 years. However, the situation is woefully behind this number, and COVID, geopolitical tensions, and China's reputation in the West are largely to blame. A State Department Level 3 travel warning recommending that Americans reconsider travel to mainland China and Hong Kong, quote, due to arbitrary enforcement of local laws, including in relation to exit bans and the risk of wrongful detentions, end quote, isn't helping either. According to data from the Institute of International Education, in the last full academic year before the pandemic, over 11,000 Americans were studying in China, making it the most popular non-European destination for US students abroad and the 17th overall. As of June 2023, China wasn't even among the top 20. Nicholas Burns, the US ambassador to Beijing, in a speech last month, said that there were only 800 or so Americans currently studying in university credit programs in China. A spectacular collapse in numbers, likely having a significant impact on a generation of Americans lacking China experience. Incredibly too, around 60% of this 800 or so US students were enrolled at New York University, Shanghai, meaning a little over 200 are enrolled with Chinese universities. The Beijing think tank Center for China and Globalization estimates that if you include visiting non-degree students, the number is closer to 3,000. Meanwhile, the number of Chinese students in the US is approximately 290,000, meaning there are about 100 to 360 times more Chinese studying in the US than Americans studying in China. This is also a spectacular disparity. Before the pandemic, the number of US students in China had already dropped by more than a fifth since its peak in 2012, with many students interested in China studies or Mandarin going to Taiwan instead. David Moser, academic director of CET China Studies at Beijing Capital Normal University, told US-based The Wall Street Journal that the fact that China ended COVID restrictions later than other countries is only part of the explanation for this low number. He said the number of Americans studying in China has been declining for over a decade amid rising US-China tensions and the tightening of controls on expression under Xi. He's quoted as expressing, quote, "What's happening now is that after COVID and even after China opened up, the students didn't come back. We really need to have people at all levels of government, business, academia who are China savvy. I feel like we have already lost a generation of those people." End quote. As a side note, one of the reasons I started China Update was because I saw how few people were coming to China to follow what was happening here on the ground, and I wanted to increase the frequency and quality of conversations about China. If you think I am doing that with these sort of episodes and you're enjoying this episode in particular, it's a huge help if you can hit the like button. Sharing and subscribing is a big help as well, and it means you'll be on top of the most up-to-date analysis when it's released every day. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable. This is just a one-man band, but with your support, I can keep producing these free and open for all 6 days a week. We remember recently US Ambassador Burns blamed Beijing for getting in the way of greater engagement, only supporting Beijing-backed programs while frustrating embassy initiatives. Beijing rejects the idea that it is getting in the way of embassy initiatives. A State Department spokesperson told the Wall Street Journal that it was, quote, focused on expanding people-to-people ties, end quote, but said that the Chinese government, quote, does not consistently meet us halfway in our efforts to build bridges between the people of our two countries, end quote, adding, quote, we need more US students going to China to learn Mandarin, study Chinese culture, and become our next generation of China experts, end quote. Now, whether you see China as a partner or a rival, understanding it is critical. Recently, the dean of Fudan University's Institute of International Studies told policymakers in Washington, quote, even if you think of China as an enemy, you have to have a better understanding of your enemy, end quote. The Wall Street Journal writes that China program directors say other factors are also dissuading Americans from studying in China, including fewer and more expensive flights, the relative difficulty of getting a student visa compared with other destinations, and challenges like adapting to China's digital ecosystem, including the ubiquitous use of apps like WeChat. Quote, potentially adding to concerns, 4 college instructors affiliated with an American college were stabbed last month in northeastern China, an attack the Chinese Foreign Ministry at the time characterized as an isolated incident, US Ambassador Burns, however, has asked for more information on the motives of the assailant. End quote. There are groups of people, however, moving from the US to China, deportees. This week, the US Department of Homeland Security said that 116 Chinese nationals were deported back to China. The move that comes after a surge of Chinese migrants entering the US at the southern border since 2023. In October through May, US Customs and Border Protection agents have apprehended over 31,000 Chinese nationals along the southern border, about a quarter of the total arrests at the border during the period. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Saturday, have a restful weekend, and I will see you all on Monday.